All right. Again, thanks for being here. We're glad you're a part of First Century. It's an honor to have you and all of our guests here with us today. Today, we're going to finish up a series we've been on for the last few weeks called Life Hacks. A life hack is a simple trick or tip that makes an everyday thing easier to do, an everyday task around the house, or just a small thing. It's a little twist to it that makes it simple. I've got a few that I'll share, and these are all food and drink related. I guess when I found these, I was hungry or thirsty, and so there's a theme today to these. Just a few simple life hacks. How many coffee drinkers do we have in the house? Everybody but me, I guess, all right? You like cold coffee? Nah, kind of mixed. So here's an idea. If you have extra coffee, you can put it in your ice cube trays and freeze it. So if you want to make your coffee cold, you can do it with coffee things and not water down your coffee. So that's kind of a neat idea. I would never use that because I don't like coffee, but that's for you guys. That's just for you. If you get pizza and you bring it home, here's an idea. Now, this only works if your car has seat warmers, which, again, this wouldn't apply to me because I don't have that. But this is, again, for you. I'm not thinking about me with these. I'm thinking about you guys, okay? So if you have a seat warmer in your car, you can turn it on high and put your pizza there in the seat. It'll keep your pizza a little bit warmer on your way home, which, hot pizza is happy people. And so that's a great little tip for you. Here's the last one. I remember as a kid I used to do this. I'd have a can of soda and I'd have a straw in there and it would go everywhere, and I'm just trying to figure out how to get it on there. That's annoying and a little embarrassing. You can use the tab to stick your straw in there. It'll keep it in place. So that's kind of a neat little life hack for you. So those are some simple tips or tricks to make little life hacks for your life a little easier. But the point of this series is based off that idea, but the point is not just to share these, although they're interesting and useful. The point is to look at our lives, big picture, and say, what are little things and tips and tricks that we can use in big areas of our lives that would help them be a little bit easier, a little less stressful, help our relationships to be stronger? What can we do? And so we've looked at a couple of things, and last week we started this 2-week series talking about temptation. Last week we looked at 4 truths about temptation. There are certain things about this issue in our life that we need to know about to help it to be easier for us to recognize temptation when it stares us in the face. Because some decisions that we have to make don't seem that big of a deal. We discussed that last week, but they can be. Even little things we'll talk about today can add up to big things over time. And so we looked at what are some things that we can know about this option I have in front of me to help me make the best decision I can to resist the wrong one. This week we're going to look at the exact opposite with temptation. This week we're going to look at 4 lies about temptation. What are 4 things that when temptation is staring us in the face, we can look and say, that is not true about this option? Temptation is trying to trick me. It's trying to fool me into making a difficult, a bad decision, a wrong decision, even a sinful decision. So what are things that I can know are not really what they seem? We're going to look at 4 lies about temptation. And we're going to be working through majority of Proverbs chapter 7. This series is set in the book of Proverbs. I want to mention 2 quick things about this chapter and Proverbs in general. The first thing about this chapter is that it looks on the surface to be talking about a man and a woman committing adultery. That's not really what's going on here. This is an allegory. This is a story where the characters don't really mean what they say they mean, but it's telling a story. And so there's a couple of reasons for this. Throughout Proverbs, there's an allegory that involves 2 women. They're not real women. They're not actual people. But Solomon, who writes these Proverbs, uses the names, if you will, of 2 women to illustrate what we're talking about with temptation mainly. One woman's named Wisdom, and one woman's named Folly. Throughout, you're going to see he talks about she did this and she says this and follow her and do what she says. He's not talking about a woman. He's talking about these 2 allegorical women, Wisdom and Folly. Now, it makes sense that Solomon would use women as an allegory. He's known for having hundreds of wives. So he's thinking about women a lot, apparently. And so it makes sense that Solomon would use women as his allegory throughout Proverbs, and that's what he does. There's also this theme that we see in Proverbs 7 that we see throughout the entire Old Testament, and that is this issue of adultery. So whenever God uses this language a lot, Whenever he sees that his people, the nation of Israel, were falling away from serving him and him only, he used the language in that way. He would say that you've been unfaithful to me, or you've gone after other gods, and he uses some pretty strong language at times to get that point across, but he used this idea of a woman being unfaithful to her husband in this way. And so it follows in this consistent pattern that this chapter kind of does the same sort of thing. But really, Proverbs 7 and all of Proverbs is not so much this issue alone, but it's showing that wisdom and folly are always in front of us. And Proverbs is trying to show us why we should pursue wisdom and resist folly. Or in the case of this series, we should pursue the right decision and resist temptation that's going to lead us down a path we don't really want to go. We think we do, but really in the long run or in hindsight, we don't. So let's get into specifically this proverb, Proverbs 7, 4 lies to help us to not believe so we can resist temptation. Lie number 1 is this. Lie number 1 about temptation is to believe what you see. The first lie of temptation, believe what you see. Proverbs 7, we'll start at verse number 15. This is the woman here speaking to a man who's found her. We'll talk about the relationship throughout our time today. Proverbs 7:15, the woman says, "You're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you, and here you are. My bed is spread with beautiful blankets, with colored sheets of Egyptian linen. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink our fill of love until morning." Again, this is not a literal situation or scenario that Solomon's talking about. We have to understand this throughout our time together today. He's using this story. He's talking to a son, whether it's one of his actual sons or just in general people that are listening to me, which is what we're doing today. He's using this example to prove a point. So let's not get caught up in this exact scenario, but understand the point it's trying to make, all right? So, on the surface, these verses to this man sound very enticing, very appealing. She says, "You're the one for me. I came looking for you." That would sound great, right? That's what you want from someone that you're in love with. You're the only one for me, right? That's what it looks like. Everything looks nice. She even talks about the smells. Everything's going to smell great. But here's the reality of the situation in Proverbs 7. We're going to look at a verse right before this section and a verse right after to see how we can't believe what we see when it comes to temptation. Proverbs 7 verse 10 says, "The woman approached him seductively dressed and sly of heart." And then verse 21, after they have this exchange, it says, "So she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery." The woman, again, I want to stress, we're not talking about just a scenario, but temptation in general. We can't believe what we see. It says this one was sly of heart. That describes temptation pretty well. The wrong decision to make when faced with a choice, the sinful decision to make when faced with a choice is sly at heart. It's not what it appears to be on the surface. It says the woman flattered this man. So what she told him was not objectively true. She might have said, "I came looking for you and you only," but we find out later she walks down on this corner all the time. She tells every guy that. And so what she's saying to him, he has an option to believe or not. And what he should do is not believe her, because what you see cannot be believed when it comes to temptation. Appearances can be deceiving. Temptation is always deceptive. Temptation is never what it seems. There's a surface level thing that temptation wants us to believe, but if we take time to dig down deep in that decision, we'll find pretty easily most of the time this is going to lead to destruction and this is going to lead to life. That's the option that we have. Temptation always overpromises and always underdelivers. Again, the woman says, "I've been looking just for you. I've prepared everything beautifully just for us." And she doesn't mean any of that. He's just the flavor of the month. He's just the guy that she's happened to see on the street to seduce. So temptation does that. It's never what it appears to be. And this is why we should never make quick decisions when faced with these kind of big life decisions. We want to pause and think before we act. Because if we're impulsive, we're going to be more likely to give in to temptation more often. We're going to be like, "That looks good. Let's do that." And it might be destructive to you. This is the easy way. Let's do that. And rarely is the easy way the right way. Am I right? In life in general, rarely is the easy way the right way. Once in a while, we're blessed with that reality. but rarely is it true. We don't want to be short-sighted in decision making when it comes to temptation, because we're just going to see what's right there and not look further into the situation, not weigh options, not consider outcomes, and just think, yep, looks good, feels good, smells good, tastes good, let me just do that, right? So don't believe what you see. That's the first lie of temptation. The second lie of temptation is that we try to rationalize the temptation. And I have there in parentheses the term rational lies. If you slow down that word, you get really what's happening here. When we rationalize, we're telling ourselves rational lies. But we're telling ourselves lies. Let me give you three main lies that we tell ourselves to rationalize temptation. And this, again, I struggle with this week because some of these statements that I say sounds like children, but we still do it as adults. It's more refined. It's fancier. We wouldn't say it in these terms, but it's the same idea. And so it's true. The first way that we try to rationalize temptation is to say, I deserve this. This promotion at work, I deserve it. I may not have earned it. I may be cheating my coworker out of what they deserve, but I deserve it. I've been here longer. I've worked just as hard as they do, but it may not be ours to take. The recognition at our job may not really be ours to take in a certain situation, and we're tempted to, yeah, I'm going to take that. Yeah, absolutely, I'm going to have a pat on the back from the boss. I didn't really do the work, but I'll take the credit for it. But we tell ourselves, I deserve it. Somehow I do. I deserve to be in a loving relationship, right? Even if it's not with your spouse. And we'll talk more in detail about that in a second. But we tell ourselves, I deserve to be in a loving relationship. I deserve this. I deserve this person. We tell ourselves that. I deserve this big break or this opportunity, even if it's not ethical or moral. We'll convince ourselves. We'll tell these rational lies that I deserve it. And here's a red flag, though, with this lie, is that we're focusing on ourselves in all of these rationalizations. It's all about me and what I want, what's coming to me, what I deserve. That should be a red flag. If we're in a season of it's all about me and what I need, what I want, we should maybe stop and say, I might want to not choose that option after all. The second way that we try to rationalize temptation is to say it's someone else's fault that I'm in this mess. Maybe like at work you would say, well, my coworker said that was okay. Well, it's not ethical, right? I don't care what they said. It doesn't matter. And it's like, your parents would say, if Tommy jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? And we don't think of it in those terms, but we're faced with these temptations all the time because this person seems to think it's okay. Well, I guess that makes it okay. We put the blame on someone else for our issue with temptation or even when we give in to temptation. We would say this, hopefully you've not thought this, maybe you have. If my spouse gave me the kind of attention that this other person gives me, maybe I wouldn't be so open to starting a relationship with them. We put the blame on someone else when we're the ones facing the temptation. Not them, not the spouse that has, done this or that. But we tend to do that to rationalize this decision that we're considering making or that we've already made. We would say, well, why didn't anyone try to stop me or talk some sense into me? And I would almost guarantee you, if you honestly look back, you would find people who tried. You would find people, honestly, who tried to say no, and you probably got mad at them. We probably thought, well, don't judge me. Yeah, that's not your place to tell me what to do with my life. And we push them away, and then in the end, when we end up messing up our lives or relationships, we wonder, why didn't anybody warn me? Where were the warning signs? And there were probably plenty of them. Or we'll say this one. I love this one. The devil made me do it. And I have scripture to back that up. We talked about it last week. Matthew 4, the devil made me do it. Genesis 3, the devil made me do it. And the devil doesn't make anyone do anything. He doesn't have that much power. You're giving the devil too much credit when you say he made me do something. No, he presents you with options. He makes it look so enticing to go down this route when he knows it's a cliff, you're going to die when you fall off the edge. But yet he just sets it up, and then it's up to us to make those decisions. We can't blame anyone or anything with temptation. And here's a red flag for this one too. When we find ourselves sort of shirking responsibility for what we're facing and pointing fingers. So we don't want to point the finger here, right? I deserve stuff so I can do it. We also don't want to point the finger out there. They made me do it. It's their fault. Why didn't they warn me? We don't want to do that either. That should be also a red flag. With rationalization, here's the trickiest one that I've come up with, and that is this one. We try to rationalize temptation and usually the negative option, or we rationalize the bad decision that we've already made by saying this: God will forgive me. I can do it because God will forgive me. And that's what we see in Proverbs 7 here. Proverbs 7, 13 through 15. The woman here with this man, it says this: she threw her arms around him and kissed him, and with a brazen look she said, I've just made my peace offerings and fulfilled my vows. And then she says again, you're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you, and here you are. So what the woman is saying, I've done my religious duties, and so God will overlook what we're about to do. We sometimes we're tempted to rationalize temptation in the same way. We might say, well, I go to church, so I'm fine. I can get away with that because I built up enough points with God that I'll be fine. We want to rationalize temptation in that way. Or I give in the offering, or I even volunteer at church, and so I've got enough good that when the scales balance out, I'll probably be fine. Or we'll even say, I'm a Christian, so God has to forgive me, right? That's what he does. He can't not forgive me. And here's what I would say to that. That's why this one's a bit tricky, because God does love to forgive people. That's who he is. That's what he does. He never fails in doing that. The key is, listen closely, God forgives repentance, not prepentance. Okay? Trying to rationalize by saying God will forgive me is prepentance. I'm going to do what I know I probably shouldn't do, but God's okay with me, so he'll be okay with this. That's prepentance. God doesn't work that way. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sin, God's faithful and just to forgive us of our sin and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. But also in Romans, at the end of Romans 5 and the beginning of Romans 6, Paul says that where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. But Romans 6:1, he says, but does grace mean we have a license to sin now? And then he says, absolutely not. And if you get into the Greek there, it's possible he used a curse word. I'm just telling you the truth right now. He uses some strong language to say this is not how God works. Because God's gracious doesn't mean you can have a license now to sin and then repentance. God must forgive me. It's like, there's a limit there. There's a term that we would call frustrating the grace of God. That's what that really means. We're bordering on that where God says, I don't forgive prepentance. Sorry about that. You might want to rethink that strategy. It doesn't work. You're going to be disappointed when you find out that's not really how it goes. But we try to make ourselves believe these rational lies of temptation. The third lie when it comes to temptation is this: there are no consequences to this temptation. It's a huge lie, but we try to believe it all the time. And there's, again, three main ways that we do this. We'll say things like, well, this decision only affects me. Right? It only affects me. And there's a famous poem with the opening line is, no man is an island unto himself. You ever heard that before? It's true. Life is like a box. No, that's a different one. Life is like a pond. Think about all of humanity. We call it a sea of humanity. Let's just call it a sea then. We already got a name for it. Okay. So humanity is in a sea. We're all in the same sea together. Every decision that every person makes, whether for good or for bad, is like a pebble being dropped in the water. When you drop a pebble of any size in the water, what happens? Ripple effect. Yes. Every decision. And so what we do matters. What we do affects other people. It will create ripples, and as we'll talk about in a second, maybe even create waves if it goes unchecked for long enough. This is a lie. This will only affect me. Let me give you two examples from Scripture to illustrate this point. First is Solomon's dad, King David. We've talked about this a lot, but it's the prime example of this being true. So at the prime of, past the prime of David's life, he's kind of on the decline, but he's still in power. He's still popular, all that sort of thing. He has an affair with one of his best friend's wives. And you would think, well, he might have rationalized it's only going to affect me. No one's going to find out. It's going to be not a problem, not a big deal. But what happens? It affected a lot of people because they did conceive a child through this affair, but the child died during childbirth. So now this woman, who's not innocent in her own right necessarily, we don't know all the details, but she's affected certainly by this because she's lost a baby in childbirth. She's got to deal with those emotions now, and David has started that ripple effect. Then you look later on in David's life when his children are grown, you see this scenario almost play out exactly the same way years later. One of David's sons has an open affair. When I say open, I mean open, like on top of a roof, on top of a house, in public, has an affair, just like David did. And so it affected even the next generation in David's life through his example. So it does, what we do does affect other people. In the Old Testament book of Joshua, there's a man named Achan. And he must have been hurting really bad. He was aching, all right? But all right. So I don't know how you translate that. I'm so sorry I did that just now. Okay. So I'm making Dawn work really hard today. All right. So Achan here, he's an Israelite. And the people of Israel in chapter 6 of Judges have just conquered Jericho. You ever heard of the walls of Jericho fall? Huge victory. God gives this land or this city over to them. But he says, don't take any of the spoils for yourselves. Anything that we do take is going to be used for worship purposes. But Achan decides, well, I really want this. He takes a robe and a little bit of silver, not a lot. And I'm sure he's thinking, this is only going to affect me. No one's going to find out. It's not a lot. I'm not trying to get rich. It's a nice robe. We're just going to waste it. We're just going to burn it to the ground. I don't think so. And so he takes it. And he would think, well, it's only going to affect me. But here's what happens. The very next battle Israel goes out on paper, it looks like they should slaughter the enemy, right? They even say, we're just going to take a little small army to defeat this next group because it'll be fine, no big deal. And they are soundly defeated. And it even says in their retreat, as many as 36 Israelite soldiers were killed, retreating back to the camp. And then that's when something becomes fishy. Joshua knows something's wrong here. What's happened? And so he realizes, God tells him, hey, you've got someone who disobeyed the last order, and that's why this happened. And so they bring Achan forward. He confesses to taking just a few things, and you would think it'll just affect me, right? But already 36 soldiers have been killed in battle because of his disobedience. That's what the scripture says. And then what do they decide to do? Well, they're going to stone him to death for disobedience and his entire family. Ouch. Ouch. And then they burn their bodies after that. But that's just a different detail, all right? Brutal. So Achan's temptation and then his eventual giving into that, his sin, didn't just affect him, did it? Other lives were literally lost because of his giving in to temptation, his lack of resistance to temptation. What we do has a ripple effect in the lives of others. Another lie that we would say about no consequences is it's not that big of a deal. It's small. It's only one time. It's really innocent. I can explain it away. But again, look at the ripple effect. Even little things make a big difference. You know what a wave is? Just a really big ripple. That's what it is. When the wind carries that ripple from the middle of the ocean far enough for long enough, it's going to crash onto the shore as a huge wave. That's all that is. And so we don't think, oh, it's little, it's just one time, it's innocent, not a big deal. No. Ripples that go far long enough create waves. And that creates tsunamis that destroy things. And so our decisions, good or bad, can have large consequences long term. The final way that we try to convince ourselves that there will be no consequences to our actions is we'll say, well, what they don't know won't hurt them. Proverbs 7, we see this exact scenario play out. Proverbs 7, verses 18 through 20. The woman says to the man, come, let's drink of our fill of love until morning. Let's enjoy each other's caresses. For my husband is not home. He's away on a long trip. He's taken a wallet full of money with him and won't return until later this month. So she's justifying her behavior. There's no consequences because he won't know. Not a big deal. But just because someone doesn't know that we've wronged them doesn't mean it won't still affect them. In some ways, it can affect them even more, even worse, especially if that comes out in the end, that we've given in to that temptation and wronged someone in a certain way. And here's why. Because even if they don't find out, or even if they don't find out for a long time, unless you're a psychopath, okay, it will affect you. The guilt of what you've done against someone will eat away at you. And that's going to cause you to start being weird. It's gonna weigh on your conscience. It's gonna affect your performance at work. If you've done something unethical at work, it's gonna make you kind of weird around your coworkers for a while. They're gonna start asking, "Are you all right? Yeah, I'm fine." And you're sweating. You're like, "Hope they don't ever find out I'm gonna get fired or what." It's just gonna affect you at your job. There will be a tendency to become withdrawn in relationships because I'm afraid I might slip up and tell what I shouldn't tell. Or I'll be afraid that if I give away too many details, they'll put pieces together and trace back to me. We become withdrawn. It never leads anywhere good. Sometimes we do other strange, wacky behavior that then we're weird, and then everybody's weird, and then here's the problem. And we've heard this a lot, is that the cover-up is worse than the crime. Isn't that true? Because what happens is when we are tempted to make a wrong decision and no one knows and we try to hide it, if it does come to light, that revelation causes more pain than if we would have just said, "You know what, I'm really dealing with this temptation. I need some help." Or I need some advice. Or I need some prayer. Now, I will say that takes a lot of courage to do that. That's why it's rarely done, in my opinion. That's why it's easier to just deal with it on our own and fight and be so frustrated and get so worn down. Or we get worn down to the point of giving in to temptation because we tried to hold it in instead of finding close people that we trust to share even our weaknesses with. Scripture says confess your sins to one another. So we should have those people in our lives that we can trust with this sensitive information. Things that we wouldn't tell anyone else. Now, if you don't have those kinds of people, find them. Pray for them to be found in your life. You've got to have them. Otherwise, when temptation gets too hot and heavy, like little things I can flick off, I can handle, no big deal. Like medium things, I can probably fight long enough and be okay. And if there's a big thing or I keep getting hit with the same thing in the same area, if I don't have that core group or even that one person to share that with, it's going to be, I would say, impossible to fight it off forever. And then when it comes out, now we have to deal with shame, regret. We lose trust in people. We have to repair our reputation now. And that's way more work than just saying, "Hey, I'm human and I'm struggling right now." It seems hard to do that, but it's not. It's just not. The cover-up is worse than the crime. There are consequences to our actions. There is a ripple effect to life. And the final lie that I want to discuss today when it comes to temptation is this, and this might be the worst one of all. If I've given in, it's too late. That's a lie. It's not true. You might have totally feel like you've exploded your life into pieces. It's not too late. You might feel like that you've ruined relationships beyond repair. It's really not too late. Is it going to be work to recover? Yes. Is it going to be painful to recover? Yes. But it's never too late. We'll say things like, "I can't escape this. I feel like I'm caught in a cycle. I'm too far down this road to turn back. I've messed things up beyond repair. My life, my finances, my career, my relationships, my reputation." And what that does is that slowly keeps us from being motivated to recover. We feel so lost. We feel so out of it. We feel so in despair that why should I even try to stop? Why should I even try to fix it? I won't be able to. We lose that motivation if we're not careful. And we live in a constant state of shame and guilt over what we've done. It's sometimes easier to just, do that than to try to fix it. It's work to repair that once we've given in. It is work, but it's never too late to build back up what we've destroyed. It's never too late to repair what we have torn apart. It's never too late. Here's how Proverbs 7, let me read this first. Proverbs 22 and 23 of chapter number 7 says this. "He followed her at once." So the man followed the woman at once. "Like an ox going to the slaughter. He was like a stag caught in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce its heart. It was like a bird flying into a snare, little knowing it would cost him his life." So this man in this scenario, in this analogy, this allegory, seems like it's over. I've blown it. I've messed up. I gave in to temptation, and now my life's over. Now my future's ruined. There's no hope for me. But here is how Proverbs 7 ends. Here's how it ends. Verse 24. Solomon says, "So listen to me, my sons, and pay attention to my words. Don't let your heart stray away toward her. Don't wander down her wayward path. for she's been the ruin of many. Many men have been her victims. Her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. So as much as this story is saying, don't do this, it's saying as well, well, instead, do this. That's what Proverbs is all about. As much as Proverbs is saying, hey, don't do this, well then what's the alternative? Probably fine, right? I don't want to do this, let's do this instead. And that's really, and I've said it this way before, every thou shalt not in life implies a thou shalt. Everything that I feel like I want to do but shouldn't, the opposite is there, right? There's an option. It's not that we're faced with just one thing to do and it's going to lead us to destruction. There are other options available that if we can muster up the strength through the power of the Holy Spirit helping us do this, we can say no to the things that are wrong or bad or sinful or destructive and say yes to things that bring life and joy to us and others. So Solomon here at the end he's not saying, hey guys, I'm trying to make you feel so much pressure. Do the right thing all the time. He's not putting pressure on them. He's not saying you should feel so bad if you give in to temptation. That's not what he's saying. He's encouraging his sons here and encouraging us today that it's possible to resist. There's a better path to your life. And even when we choose the not so good path, there's still hope. One more example of scripture as we close. There's a story in John 7 of a woman who is caught in adultery. She's brought by the religious leaders to Jesus, who happens to be in the area, and they say, okay, she's been caught in the act of adultery. The law says you must stone her. What do you say, good teacher? And it's a trap question, because if he's going to go by the strictest sense of the law, he's going to say, yeah, stone her. But Jesus says something different. First, he didn't say anything. First, he bends down and kind of doodles in the sand for a while. No one knows what he wrote. He probably wrote down nicknames for the guys like doofus and dummy or what. I don't know what he did. Anyway, he was nice, so he didn't do that. I wouldn't have done that. So he writes in the sand, and then he just looks up and says, any of you without sin, let him cast the first stone. And what are they going to do now, right? If they stone her, as the law requires, they're now claiming to be perfect, and they can't do that. And so they drop their stones and walk away. And so then the woman's still there, just kind of awkwardly, and Jesus is still there, and he says, hey, where did all the guys go? Where did all your accusers go? And she says, well, they're not here anymore. And he says, well, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. That's the beauty of Jesus in this issue of temptation. Whether we're facing it and we feel like we're not going to give in, he's there to help us to do the right thing. When we've given in to the wrong thing, he's there to pick us up, brush us off. Let's go and sin no more. Now, he doesn't. We know we can't do that, but that's what he is trying to tell us. We can do right the next time. The beauty of Jesus is that he knows our weaknesses. And even last week we talked about he not only knows our weaknesses, but he can empathize with us in our weakness. Because Scripture says he was tempted just like us in every way, yet without sin. So he knows what it is to face temptation. He knows what it is to have an inkling or a natural human urge to do the wrong thing in every area. The beauty of Jesus is that he knows that we fall short, yet he loves us through that anyway. He doesn't turn us away. He doesn't condemn us. He's not ready to throw stones or lightning bolts, but he loves us through that. The beauty of Jesus is that he knows that we sin, and that's why he died. Period. No other reason put Jesus on the cross but because we don't always get this right. Because when temptation comes, there are times that we fall very short. There are times that we blow it drastically. We ruin things all the time, and that's why he came to this earth in the first place. To take our place on our cross for our sin. Jesus lived the life we could never live, to die the death that we did deserve, to give us a second chance that we could never earn and don't deserve, simply because he is love. That's it. Not to even things up, not to make us feel bad. Well, I died on the cross for you. Can't you get this right? That's not what he's doing. He's saying, you can't get it right, so I died on the cross for you. For no other reason than that he is love. He is hope. He is forgiveness. That's who Jesus is. So when we believe this lie, it's too late. It's a lie. It's a lie. Don't believe it. Are you still breathing? Then it's not too late. Do you still have life in your body? There's still hope for you. Is there a future, at least, the next breath in front of you? Yes. Then there's still a future for you. There's still a plan that God has for you. And yeah, it's going to include messiness. It's going to include mistakes. It's going to include us not getting every twist and turn exactly right, but that's what the guardrails of grace are for. That's what the sacrifice of Christ is all about. When we were sinners, Christ died. And that when we still sin, He's still, His death still covers that too. It's not just a one-time thing where He covers one sin, or He covers only really bad mistakes, or it's not that, all of them, every one, past, present, future. His grace covers us when we call out to Him in faith. So don't believe the lies of temptation. Don't believe them. Don't believe what you see. It's not what it appears to be. Don't believe your own rational lies. Giving in is never worth it. Don't believe there won't be consequences to the decision that you make, for good or for bad. There is a ripple effect in the sea of life. And don't give up. No matter how difficult this temptation is, don't give in. Hold on a little bit longer. Ask God to strengthen you just a little bit more. No matter how many times you've given in to the same thing, let's get up, brush ourselves off, and go and sin no more. Let's do it today. Let's start hit that refresh button. Let's do it again. No matter how terrible you think you messed your life up, that's what Jesus is all about. He takes those lives and does something wonderful with them. He takes all that we can offer Him in our imperfection and says, hey, let's do something wonderful with that life. Let's make it count for something. Let's let your mistakes count for something wonderful to help others along the way in their lives as well. Don't believe the lies. Don't give in to temptation. We can resist even the most difficult circumstance, and we can even recover from the worst of circumstances as we lean into God's grace and His power and His faithfulness to our lives.